a black vinyl record sinking into the Savannah River. Her father's voice still playing through the car speakers, confessing that he never died. He chose to disappear. And her mother, the woman Claire had mourned for 10 years, standing alive on a lighthouse porch at sunrise, holding a watering can like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. 13 hours earlier, the leather of Claire Bennett's work boot crunched down hard on the charred humidor box. Black soot exploded around her ankle in a plume so thick it caught the gray dawn light filtering through the skeletal remains of the Blue Note Jazz Club. The crunch echoed in the hollow space. A dead building, still smoking. Somewhere beyond the brick and ash, a distant siren wailed, fading into the overcast Georgia sky. She moved deeper into the ruin. Her yellow high-visibility vest blazed against the char-blackened floorboards, the bright synthetic fabric obscene in this place of cinders and collapse. The vest reflected off a pool of stagnant fire hose water, creating a distorted mirror of her determined face. The Steinway piano lay on its side like a dead animal. Its skeleton of twisted steel strings and warped wood had survived the fire where nothing else had. Claire knelt, the water soaking through her work pants, and reached into the chaos of burnt wood and tangled wire. Her hand, encased in a blue nitrile glove that was already stained with soot, probed the darkness beneath the soundboard. There, a seam, a false panel that shouldn't have been there. She pried at it. The wood groaned in protest, fibers cracking and splintering. A sharp snap. And then it gave way. The panel swinging back to reveal a space beneath, a space that had been sealed away before the fire, hidden with intention. A black vinyl record in a plain white sleeve slid into her gloved palm. The record was heavy. Real weight. The kind of weight that belonged to something that mattered. Claire pulled it carefully from the sleeve. No label. Nothing printed. Just handwritten script in white ink on the black wax of the center label. The Shepherd's Song. She stood, the record tucked under her arm. The morning light had shifted, creating long shadows through the ruins. In the doorway, the skeletal frame where the entrance had been, a man in a gray suit emerged from the ash. His face was obscured by a cloud of cigarette smoke that curled around his features like something alive. Marcus Thorne. She didn't know his name then, not yet. She only knew that he was watching her, and that the record under her arm had just become the most dangerous thing in Savannah. Her keys jingled in her left hand as she walked toward her car. The alleyway behind the club was narrow, compressed, the brick walls weeping moisture from the rain that had fallen the night before. Puddles reflected the pre-dawn grayness above. She didn't hear him. That was the first mistake. She heard only her own footsteps, only the keys, only the sound of her breathing in the cold air. A heavy arm wrapped around her throat. Her world inverted. The arm was iron, encased in a leather jacket that smelled of sweat and cigarettes, and it jerked her backward with enough force to slam her spine against the damp brick. Her head snapped back. Stars exploded in her vision. "Give me the record, Bennett." The voice was a gravelly hiss, close to her ear. Hot breath, his weight. Her lungs couldn't expand. The pressure on her windpipe was absolute. Claire's body moved on instinct. She drove her heel down onto his instep, stamping hard. The boot connected with bone and soft tissue. She felt the impact travel up through her leg. At the same moment, she drove her right elbow backward in a sharp, brutal arc. It connected with his solar plexus, the soft space where all the air lives. He wheezed, actually wheezed. The sound of his lungs collapsing, air forced out in a sharp, pained gasp. His grip loosened just enough. Claire spun. She swung her heavy leather bag in a violent arc, using the momentum of her whole body. The corner of the bag caught him across the jaw. A wiry man in a hoodie, face emerging from shadow for just a moment. Blood sprayed in a fine mist, brilliant red against the red brick. The crack of leather on bone was loud enough to echo. The man staggered backward into the shadows. He was still conscious, but hurt. Moving away. Claire lunged for her car door. Her fingers found the handle. The lock clicked open with a sharp electronic chirp. She wrenched the door wide and threw herself inside, slamming it shut behind her. The locks engaged with a metallic clunk. Through the window, the attacker stood at the alley's mouth, silhouetted against the gray morning, then turning to run, then disappearing into a white fog that had rolled in from the river. She couldn't see his face clearly. She could only see blood on brick, and her own hands trembling on the steering wheel, and the record on the passenger seat, untouched, still in its white sleeve. She drove away from there with the record pressed against her thigh. The needle of her vintage turntable descended onto the black vinyl with a precision that made her hold her breath. The needle found the groove, a harsh, rhythmic hiss as it tracked the spiral. The chrome arm gleamed in the morning light that slanted through her apartment blinds. The jazz started, a frantic saxophone solo, bright and nearly manic, ascending and diving. She recognized the sound. The blue note. That recording quality, decades old, the warm compression of analog tape. Then the saxophone cut out. A voice replaced it. Low, recorded. A man's voice, raspy and weighted with something that might have been exhaustion or fear or both. The insurance is a lie. The fire was the signal for the shepherd to come home. Claire's eyes went wide. Her ceramic mug, the brown one, the one she'd had since college, slipped from her fingers. It shattered on the hardwood floor. Coffee splashed across her white rugs in a dark starburst, soaking into the fibers, permanent and unforgiving. She lunged toward the speaker, her ear nearly touching the mesh. The voice continued, each word deliberate and slow. Don't look for me, Claire. Her father. That cadence. That specific way he rolled his R's. That pitch that she'd only heard in person for the last time 10 years ago, when he'd walked out of their house and never returned. She'd been 18. She'd been in her first year at the academy. She'd listened to his voice on voicemails for months after he disappeared, playing them back until they degraded into nothing but static and longing. This was him. This was Arthur Bennett. Claire threw open her desk drawer with enough violence to crack the wooden frame. The old police file was there, labeled Arthur Bennett, missing, because she'd never been able to throw it away. Inside was a photograph. Her father at the Blue Note, shaking hands with a man in an expensive suit. The man was wearing a gold ring, distinctive and heavy, catching the light in a way that suggested old money and older violence. The same ring she would later recognize on Marcus Thorne's left hand. Her fingers traced the photograph. The image showed her father as someone she'd never known. Not the quiet accountant who'd made her breakfast, but a man in dark clothes, standing with dangerous people, his jaw set in a way that suggested authority. Dangerous authority. She flipped through the file. Detective's notes, speculations, dead ends. One handwritten margin note in her own teenage handwriting. Dad would never disappear willingly. Never leave me. But that was what 10-year-old certainties felt like in the face of his actual voice, recorded on vinyl, saying, "Don't look for me." Warehouse 14 sat at the edge of the Savannah docks, like something that had never been modern and had aged into a kind of permanent obsolescence. Claire's car pulled up to the chain-link fence at 2:45 a.m. The rain was pouring. Heavy, vicious rain that turned the night into something aquatic and unreal. She'd spent the last 8 hours with the police file, cross-referencing addresses, following threads. The warehouse appeared twice. Thorne's name appeared in connection with it. Shell companies, dummy corporations, the kind of infrastructure that suggested smuggling or worse. The steel door was heavy and hadn't been used in months. She had to shoulder it twice before it creaked inward. She slipped through, and her wet raincoat dripped onto the concrete floor in steady, echoing drops. The air smelled of salt and machine oil, and the specific staleness of a space that had been sealed away from sunlight. A flashlight beam exploded into her eyes. She froze. The beam was bright enough to blind, and it came from the darkness between stacked wooden crates. Then Marcus Thorne emerged, his suit perfectly tailored despite the hour, his silver hair catching the light. He held a silenced pistol in his right hand, with the casual confidence of someone who used guns regularly. Two other men stood behind him, goons, thick and pale, their brass knuckles glinting in the flashlight glare. "Your father always had a flair for the dramatic, Claire. Give me the record." His voice was smooth, almost conversational. The kind of smoothness that suggested he could smile while doing terrible things. Claire didn't answer. She didn't think. Her body was already moving, diving sideways, her hands reaching for the industrial chain that hung from the gantry above. The chain was old and heavy, designed to lift machinery. She grabbed it, swung it with everything in her body weight, and the iron hook at its end caught one of the goons across the temple with a sickening metallic clang that reverberated through the warehouse. The man went down. His skull had the wrong shape now. Thorne fired. The bullet was muffled by the silencer, but loud enough in the concrete space, a sharp thwick that pocked the floor inches from where she'd been standing. She was already rolling, her muscles moving with the trained efficiency of someone who'd done this before. Someone who'd been trained for exactly this scenario in the academy that had taught her how to survive. Her fingers found the emergency kit mounted on the wall, a bright red box with a flare gun. She yanked it free, swung, and fired the flare gun directly at Thorne's feet. Red smoke exploded, a harsh hiss, billowing crimson that filled the warehouse in seconds, obscuring everything. She didn't wait to see if he'd fired again. She was moving toward the far exit, her hand trailing along the wall, her lungs burning from the smoke inhalation, her body driven by the simple animal truth that if she stopped, she would die. She hit the exit door and burst into the rain. The safe house was 20 minutes away, a place her father had mentioned once in a voice memo she'd found while cleaning his office months after he disappeared. She'd never acted on it. But now she needed shelter. Now she needed to know what else her father had hidden. The basement door was locked. She broke the lock with a crowbar from her trunk. 15 seconds, the chain breaking with a sharp crack. The basement was dark and smelled of concrete and water damage. She used her flashlight. The beam caught on old wallpaper, peeling and faded, probably from the 1970s. She pulled at it. The paper came away in strips, revealing the concrete wall beneath. Hidden in that wall was a steel safe. She entered her own birthday, 04/12/88, into the keypad with trembling fingers. The safe clicked. The heavy door swung inward. Inside was a black leather ledger. She pulled it out and sat on the concrete floor, the ledger balanced on her knees. She flipped it open. Page after page of entries, handwritten in black ink, each line a transaction. Dates, amounts, names. The Savannah route, the first page proclaimed. Every entry was signed with her father's initials. A.B. She turned page after page, her eyes moving faster, her breathing becoming shallow. $50,000 to Thorne. $30,000 to someone named Bellamy. Larger amounts, $200,000, $500,000, distributed to names she didn't recognize. A network, an organization. Her father at the center of it, moving money with the precision of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. She found the photograph folded in the back of the ledger. Her father sat at the head of a mahogany table. Around him, 5 other men. They all wore the same gold ring, a thick band with a symbol she didn't recognize, something that looked like a shepherd's crook. Her father was smiling in the photograph. Not the smile she remembered. This was cold, predatory, the smile of someone who understood the value of human suffering. He was the leader. He was the one sitting in the position of authority. He was the shepherd. Her phone buzzed at 1:05 a.m. A text from an unknown number. 60 minutes until the recording goes public. 60 minutes until your father dies again. Claire's hands went numb. She stared at the message, reading it 3 times, her brain refusing to process the implications. Someone knew about the record. Someone knew that she'd found it. Someone was counting down the minutes until... what? Until what? She sat in her car, parked on a side street in Savannah's historic district, the dashboard clock glowing green in the darkness. The rain had lessened to a drizzle. Her breath fogged the windshield. She had 60 minutes. 58 minutes now. She didn't know who had sent the message. She didn't know what they wanted. She only knew that her father had been a criminal, that the organization he'd built had tried to kill her, that the record under her seat held secrets that were worth dying for. She started the engine. The car roared to life. She reversed hard, tires screaming and smoking on the asphalt, the rear end sliding wide before the front wheels caught traction and pulled her forward. The speedometer climbed. 60 miles an hour. 70. 80. She drove toward the only place she could think of. The Talmadge Memorial Bridge, the route that led out of Savannah, the direction her father had pointed her toward, hidden in the recorded message on the vinyl. 45 minutes remaining. The bridge stretched ahead of her like something that existed between worlds. On one side, the lights of Savannah. On the other, darkness and the Savannah River below. The wind howled across the span, buffeting her car, making the steering wheel vibrate under her hands. 2 black SUVs materialized behind her. They came from nowhere. Or perhaps they'd been following her the whole time, and she'd only just noticed. They accelerated, closing the distance, trying to box her in. She pressed the accelerator. The car's engine screamed. The speedometer hit 90. One SUV pulled into the right lane. The other cut into the left. They were trying to box her in, to force her to stop or crash. Claire made a choice that existed somewhere between desperation and instinct. She wrenched the steering wheel hard to the right, aiming for the gap between the SUV and the bridge railing. The space was narrow, barely wide enough. The car clipped the SUV's bumper, metal screaming on metal, and then she was through, and the SUV was careening across the bridge toward the opposite railing. She kicked open the driver's door while the car was still moving at 70 miles an hour. The wind hit her like a physical force, trying to strip her away from the vehicle. She gripped the door frame, timing the movement, then threw herself out. She landed hard on the asphalt, the impact driving the air from her lungs. She rolled, momentum carrying her across the rough surface, her skin tearing. Blood, her own blood, bright against the rain-wet asphalt. The car behind her fishtailed, the driver trying to avoid her sprawled form, and crashed into the railing. Sparks flew where metal contacted metal. The vehicle twisted and hung suspended for a moment, and then it fell. The sound of the impact below was muffled by distance. She scrambled to her feet. Her legs worked. Everything worked. She had 30 minutes. She ran toward the bridge railing, sprinting toward the lights of the city, her lungs burning and her vision tunneling. The wind whipped her hair across her face like lashes. A figure emerged from the darkness ahead of her. Marcus Thorne, limping but still moving, still dangerous. Behind him, his remaining men fanned out across the bridge, cutting off her retreat. Thorn caught her by the collar before she could reach him. His hand closed on the fabric of her jacket, and he used her momentum against her, slamming her backward into the cold steel of a bridge cable. The impact drove the breath from her body. Stars erupted in her vision. He pressed the barrel of his gun under her chin. The metal was cold and specific. "This is happening," the cold said. "This is real." Her feet dangled over the edge of the bridge. Below was the black Savannah River, the distance vast and absolute. She couldn't breathe. His arm was iron, and it had no mercy in it. Claire's right hand moved to the sleeve of her jacket, where she kept a tool she'd carried since the academy. A small screwdriver, sharp and deadly in its specificity. She pulled it free. She didn't hesitate. She drove it into his thigh, into the meat of his leg, and twisted. He screamed. An actual scream, animal and raw. His grip loosened just enough. She twisted harder. The gun fell. It clattered on the bridge deck and slid away into the darkness. Thorn staggered back, his hand flying to the bleeding wound in his leg, blood mixing with the rain on his tailored pants. He limped toward her, his face contorted with pain and rage, and Claire backed away, step by step, until she felt the railing behind her. "He didn't run away, Claire," Thorn said, breathing heavily. "He didn't die for you. He was the one who ordered the hit on your mother to clear his path." The words landed like physical blows. "Your father was the shepherd," Thorn continued, grinning through the pain. "He killed your mother to keep the flock." Claire's legs gave out. She collapsed against the railing, her body going slack, her mind unable to process the configuration of this world. A world in which her father had killed her mother, in which her entire childhood had been built on a lie, in which love had been a transaction and safety had been a fiction. The vinyl record she'd been holding slipped from her numb fingers. It hit the asphalt. It didn't break. Records don't break like that. They're harder than the things we imagine they should be. She stared at the black water below. It looked like ink. The color of the vinyl record. The color of her father's heart, she thought, then stopped thinking anything at all. Thorn raised the gun. He'd retrieved it while she was lost in the machinery of shock. He raised it to her head, his hand steady despite the bleeding leg, and she heard the hammer cock. The mechanical click of it, the sound of finality. She had nowhere to go. The wind howled. The bridge groaned. Below, the river moved like something alive, waiting. Claire's hand shot out and grabbed Thorn's ankle. The movement came from somewhere beyond thought, from the place where survival lives when the brain has surrendered. She gripped his ankle with the iron of her legs and twisted her entire body weight, using leverage and physics and the specific knowledge that she had only one move, only one chance. Thorn's feet left the ground. He fell backward, his arms windmilling, the gun firing once into the air, a muffled thwick that was swallowed by the wind. He fell into the fog that rolled up from the river. She heard him scream, heard the sound fade, heard the distant splash that might have been him hitting the water or might have been her imagination. She lay on the bridge deck, breathing, air moving in and out. The most basic fact of continued existence. The record lay a few feet away. She crawled to it. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely grip it. She stumbled to her car, the one she'd arrived in, still running, the driver's door hanging open, and pulled out the portable vinyl player she kept in the glove compartment. She slammed the record onto the turntable. She spun the speed dial to 33 1/3. The needle descended. The jazz started again. The saxophone. Then her father's voice. "Claire, if you're hearing this, I'm dead. I wasn't the leader. I was the bait. Thorn thinks I killed your mother, but I hid her. She's alive. The ledger is the key to her location. The voice was different from the first recording. Softer. There was something in it that sounded almost like love, or the ghost of it, or the person her father might have been if the world had been different. Your mother is at the lighthouse. Find the gold ring's compartment. Then only the sound of the record spinning, the vinyl continuing its rotation, the needle tracking nothing but silence, and the ambient noise of whatever room he'd recorded this in. The ocean, perhaps. Wind. The sound of distance. Claire reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out the gold ring she'd taken from Thorne's hand during the struggle on the bridge. The heavy band, warm from her body heat, caught the light. She twisted the bezel. It clicked and swung open. Inside was a microfiche slide, impossibly small, containing printed text that she could barely read in the darkness. An address. Tybee Island, 402 Light Road, the lighthouse, her mother, alive. The sun was breaking over the Atlantic when she reached the cottage by Tybee Island Lighthouse. Golden hour. The world turned to fire and gold, the water aflame, the sand glowing, the air thick with salt and light. The cottage was small and white, with a picket fence painted the color of a robin's egg. The fence had weathered, but it had held. Nothing about it was remarkable. It was the kind of place where people lived quiet lives, where the past could be buried under routine and the sound of waves. Claire stopped at the fence. Her hands were on the wood. Her body was trembling in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. An older woman stepped onto the porch. Gray hair, but the same eyes. Claire's eyes, reflected back across 10 years and 10,000 miles of grief. She was holding a watering can. Ordinary, domestic, real. The can fell. It hit the porch boards with a plastic thud. The woman's hand went to her mouth. Recognition. The moment where the past rewrote itself into the present. Claire climbed the fence. Or perhaps she walked around it. She would never quite remember this part. The logistics of it. The specific path her feet took. She only remembered the woman's arms around her, and the smell of her, and the sound of her voice saying her daughter's name again and again, as if by repetition she could close the decade between them, could fold time back on itself, could undo the death that had never happened. Later, Claire would ask about the record. She would ask about her father, the true story, the version that lived inside her mother's memory. She would learn about betrayal and sacrifice, about a man who'd built an empire only to tear it down from the inside, about a woman who'd spent 10 years in hiding, protected by the man she'd believed dead. But that came later. In that moment, she reached into her jacket and pulled out the black vinyl record. She walked past her mother, down the porch steps, across the sand, toward the water. The waves were bright and specific. The salt air filled her lungs. She held the record at arm's length and released it. The black circle caught the light as it fell. It hit the water. For a moment it floated, the surface tension of the sea holding it up. Then a wave rolled through, and it sank. The vinyl descended into the deep, the secret descending with it. The questions and the mysteries and the burden of it all swallowed by the blue. She stood on the beach and watched until it was gone.